Hello, welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Tonight we continue the story of Myra and the online school for adventuring. Myra and her friends have been caught sneaking into the library, and now they must face the consequences. Or will they? Perhaps they'll get some help from an unexpected quarter. You'll have to listen and see what happens. I hope you enjoy the story. Having been kicked out of the library, there was little to do for them to head back to their dorm and try to catch some sleep before the next day. Myra regaled Tweety with everything that had happened when she arrived back to her room, and then she collapsed in bed, fully expecting there would be security guards waiting for her when she woke up. But when she woke up, everything seemed pretty normal. Tweety was just finishing polishing her head, which Tweety did on a semi-routine basis. And
is it like the human version of brushing their hair?
Kind of, yeah. And Myra said, so, did I miss anything while I was asleep? Yeah, said Tweety. I polished my toes. See? And Tweety held out Tweety's feet for Myra to admire, which Myra obligingly did, and then said, so, no campus security? There's no notes under the door? Nope, said Tweety.
Wait a second. What happened to those diamonds that Tweety pooped?
She still has them.
What is she doing with them?
Keeping them for a rainy day.
What?
Keeping them for a rainy day.
What does that mean?
It means she doesn't have any need for large amounts of money right now. But if she does in the future, she's got them in reserve.
Okay.
I mean, she's got all her books paid for. She wasn't planning on quitting school, so she just held on to them. So Myra said, well, there's probably stalker llamas waiting for all of us out front. But when she peered out the window in front of the building, no stalker llamas. Huh, she said, that's really strange. Well, I guess I better grab some breakfast before class. You coming, Tweety? Nah, said Tweety. I'm going to polish my fingers before I go to class this afternoon. Okay, said Myra. She headed down to the cafeteria. She ran into Antoine and Chelsea on the way there, and they went through the cafeteria line together. And then when they got out of line, they saw Hetty sitting at a table, waving them over. They sat next to her. So, said Hetty, how'd it go? Said Myra. Is there something that they teach you in zealot classes about, is there a thing worse than bad? Hetty said, ooh, so you didn't find anything? Antoine said, well, not really. I mean, we met the librarian. Oh, said Hetty. Oh. So, what happened? And they filled her in. Myra said, look, Hetty, just in case we disappear today, this is where that book that I found, the book that I brought out about what was the fate of the fates, this is where it's filed. So if we disappear, get it and take it to my roommate Tweety and Corin, and they will help you try to figure things out and meet with the weredeer. That's ridiculous, said Hetty. If you go missing, we're coming looking for you. That's sweet, said Myra. But if we go missing, really, probably better we cut our losses, right? And that somebody who still knows what's going on, stays free to help the deer.
What do they think is going to happen to them?
They really don't know. They're very concerned. Myra said, well, I sort of expected that we would have gotten a summons to the administrator's office by now. But maybe the librarian hasn't told him yet, or I don't know. But she looked over at Antoine. Chelsea, I guess we just go to class now? I guess, said Antoine. I mean, I sort of hadn't planned on going to class. I mean, I did do my homework last night, but I didn't even bring in my books or equipment or anything because I didn't figure I'd be in class today. Myra shrugged. Well, we'll just have to wing it. What were we studying? What were we doing again today? Chelsea said, we were supposed to do lock picking. Well, I do have my lock picks with me, said Myra. They finished up, put their trays away, waved goodbye to Hetty, and headed off to the Stalker building for class. Professor Tad met them in the lobby, which he frequently did. Hey, he said. How are you all today? Oh, said Chelsea. We've been better. I'm sorry to hear that, said Professor Tad. Anyway, he said, I hope you don't mind. We're not going to do the regular lockpicking class today. I thought we might do something a little different, an advanced subject, if you would. Okay, said Myra. Come on, he said. I've got something new to teach you. And he took them up the stairs, and then up the stairs again, and then up the stairs again, all of which was very strange, because usually they were headed down for stalker classes into the practice dungeon in the basement. But he took them all the way up to the top floor where the faculty offices were. And Myra knew that that's where his office was, but they'd never been up there. Professor Tad liked to hold office hours like down in the practice dungeon when he was available for questions, and so none of them had ever seen his office. And he invited them into his office, and then he closed the door behind them. And Myra, out of the corner of her eye, noticed that after he had closed the door behind him, he touched like a set of little pictures that went along the door frame. And it looked like he just very quickly tapped them in a sort of a specific order. And she thought that was a little strange. And then he said, go ahead, have a seat. And he sat down behind his desk. He goes, so today I thought I would talk a little bit about something that happens in every sneaker's life. Although, most of us hope for it sooner than later. But eventually, you're going to be on an adventure and you're going to be captured by an enemy. And they're going to interrogate you. So today we're going to talk about how you deal with interrogation. Myra's breath caught in her throat for a second. She glanced over at Antoine and Chelsea, who were glancing at her, all of them wondering, what did Professor Tad know? But whatever it was, he didn't seem to be letting on. Okay, he said. Now, here are the things you need to know. Any enemy worth their salt who really wants something out of you is going to be using a magicker or an object created by a magicker to make it so that you can't lie. So, the trick is learning to just tell only the parts of the truth that you want. Because they don't have a way of making you talk, at least no real effective way. But if you're not being careful, you'll say more than you mean to. So, let's practice. And he set out a device on his desk. And he said, Chelsea. Yes, Professor, said Chelsea. What were you up to last night? Well, said Chelsea, I did my homework. And then she stopped. Professor Tad's brows went up. Really, he said. And then what did you do? And then I went to bed, said Chelsea. Uh-huh, said Professor Tad. He waited. Chelsea smiled at him. Even Myra did not think it was a very convincing smile. Professor Tad said, all right. He looked over at Myra. What were you up to last night, Myra? Oh, said Myra, I also, did my homework, and then went to bed. That's great, said Professor Tad. I think you all have learned that first lesson very well. Now, here's your second lesson. If the person interrogating you is very clever, they're going to find a way to make you talk. And they might even have one of these, he pointed to the little device on his desk, that has a fluency prompter on it. And he tapped the little device again, and it went from green to blue. And he looked at Antoine. He said, "So, Antoine, what did you do last night?" And Antoine said, "Well, first I did my homework, and then I went to bed, and then I woke up and snuck through the..." And as he was talking, Myra could see that Antoine's face looked very shocked, like he had meant to stop talking, and he just couldn't stop talking. He said, "We walked through the night, and we snuck around, and we looked at the doors of the main library, and then we went around to the side, and we picked the lock on the door in the main library." And Professor Tad reached out and tapped the device again. It went back to green, and Antoine's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. "See," said Professor Tad, "these can be trouble if you're trying to keep your mouth closed." "Yeah," said Antoine. "Lockpicking the library," said Professor Tad. "Interesting." "So, Professor," said Myra, who had a feeling that Professor Tad was not going to continue this line of questioning because he had turned it back off when he didn't have to. She said, "So what do we do how do we escape that?" "Well," said Professor Tad, "I have several recommendations. The chief one, as your main sneaking professor, is this: don't get caught." "Yes," said Myra, "that is very good advice." "It is," said Antoine. "Now," said Myra, "let's say we've already been caught, and that, someone is going to interrogate us. How do we avoid just talking and talking and talking and telling everything we know if they have one of these gadgets?" "Well," said Tad, one of the things you do is what Antoine was doing, which is that he was trying to go into excruciating detail and slow things down as much as possible." Professor Tad nodded to himself. He said, "But that'll only take you so far, unless you expect an imminent rescue, but sometimes that's all you can do. Now, it's a good thing, of course, that the school is going to issue all of you your own freedom gems." "Our what?" said Myra. "Oh, I'm sure you saw it in the student manual. It's standard issue," he said. And then he opened up his desk and he took out 3 what looked like rocks, but very sort of dirty, kind of brown, rusty-looking rocks. He said, "Now you swallow these." "I'm sorry," said Myra. "You're forgiven," said Professor Tad. "You each swallow one of these, and while it's inside you, you're immune to this little gadget here." "Really?" said Myra. "And these are standard issue?" "Oh, yes," said Professor Tad. "We give them to all the first-year sneakers." "Huh." So he said, I'll let you go ahead and test these out now." "So we swallow them," said Myra, "and they just stay inside us forever?" "No," said Professor Tad. "That's the downside. They do come back out eventually, and we don't have a lot of extras, so you will need to retrieve it, clean it thoroughly.
No.
But always keep one on you." I don't like that," said Myra. "No," said Professor Tad. "I imagine you don't. So," he said, holding out the 3 little pebbles. Myra looked at Antoine and Chelsea. "Yes, Professor," said Myra. "I think you should take them right this second," said Professor Tad. Myra reached out and, quick as a wink, threw the stone in her mouth and swallowed. Chelsea and Antoine did the same, and as the last one disappeared between Antoine's lips, and just as Myra saw his throat move with a swallow, a knock sounded on Professor Tad's door. "I'll just see who that is," said Professor Tad. He opened the door, and it was a man standing there in the uniform of campus security. He had a stalker llama on a leash next to him. He said, "Professor Tad, your students in class today, they're requested at the administrator's office." "Oh, of course," said Professor Tad. "You'll just have to catch up on your lockpicking homework later, students. But I'll see you tomorrow for class." They stood up, glanced at each other. Myra said, "Thank you, Professor." He just nodded and watched as they filed out the door. Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's show, but questions and running commentary were supplied by my children. The theme music was created by Brandon Thompson, and our wonderful logo was designed by Silas Swindelin. If you know someone who might enjoy the show, please tell them about it. Do you want more stories? You can now subscribe to the show and help pick a new story for me to tell every month. The show's website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.com. Until next time, I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.